All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce our tonight's guest speaker who is volunteering his time to be with us here tonight. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Jarrod Burks is originally from Northern Illinois, and he is a professional archaeologist specializing in geophysical surveys. He works for Ohio Valley Archaeology, Inc., a private archaeology firm in Columbus, Ohio. So one of the benefits of Zoom. Jarrod received his PhD and MA degrees in anthropology, specializing in archaeology from The Ohio State University, and his BA degree in anthropology from the University of Illinois of Urbana at Champaign. Is that how you say that? Urbana-Champaign? So. Oh, you're muted, but
something like that.
One of his great passions is relocating ancient earthwork sites through geophysical survey. That end, he has surveyed several dozen of these earthwork sites in Ohio, making numerous unique discoveries, including finding previously unknown sites. He is the president and founder of the Heartland Earthworks Conservancy and the treasurer of the Ohio Archaeological Council. I first saw one of his presentations at a state history conference, and with November being National Native American Heritage Month, I thought this would be a wonderful way to learn more about the peoples who made Ohio home for centuries and whose descendants continue to make the United States their home today. So with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Burks to share with us some of the newer methods to learn about past Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us tonight.
You're welcome. I will share my screen now. Maybe. Hopefully you all can see this. Going into slide mode. All right, looks good.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, good. So tonight's talk is going to be about earthworks. Surprise. It's something I've had a tremendous passion for the longest time now, probably 25 years. My dissertation work was at Ohio State was more about settlement patterns and the way people lived day to day during this period when earthworks were under construction and use in Ohio. But I started working at a place called Hopewell Culture National Historical Park in Chillicothe, Ohio. It's home to 5 really large ancient monuments. And of course, we spent a lot of time working at some of them and interpreting them for the public. And it didn't take long before earthworks took over my life, essentially. I don't do earthworks for a living necessarily, but I spend a lot of free time working at them and helping them become what you see before you now, places where the public can go visit and experience the earthworks for themselves on the ground and learn things about them and appreciate them in ways that they may not have been appreciated for many, many, many years. So I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Ohio is home to hundreds and hundreds of these large monumental constructions that were built by the indigenous peoples who lived here thousands of years ago. These are the ancestors to today's American Indians, and they appear to have been pretty busy in Ohio. So this is a map of the state, as you can probably tell. The counties are outlined there in light blue. And I've indicated the locations of enclosure sites. So these are places with circles or squares or other kinds of geometric and often non-geometric shapes. Some of these sites have just one little enclosure. Others have 20 of them. Some are only, the size of your house, while others are 100 acres or more in coverage. So many, many, many football fields in size. And you can see how they're kind of laid out basically in a line from about Oberlin on down to the southwest towards Cincinnati. And as you may know from studying Ohio's geography and geology, this is kind of a line where the last glacier stopped in Ohio. So we get lumpy, bumpy ground to the south and especially to the southeast, and flat ground to the northwest. And this kind of divide between the dissected, unglaciated area and flat glaciated grounds was of extreme interest to folks who build earthworks, apparently, because that's where a lot of them are found. And as you look at this map some more, maybe you'll see some little black stars on there. Those indicate the locations of really big earthwork centers. So lots of mounds, lots of big enclosures, the real famous sites. And these seem to be concentrated in southern Licking County, there in Newark, around Newark. In Ross County, there's an obscene number of earthworks. And then down towards Cincinnati and between Cincy and Dayton, there are also quite a few there. But they're really kind of all over. And this number you see on the right there, 587, that comes from a book published in 1914. Many of these sites have been lost since then. They just weren't mapped in an accurate enough way, and they were so subtle at that point that continued plowing and other kinds of development in Ohio basically erased them from visibility, if not from the face of the planet. But there's good news in that number. There are far, far more than 587 enclosure sites in Ohio. We keep bumping into them accidentally and finding new and undocumented ones, new in the sense that they're not yet added to the list of ones we know about. So I suspect there are probably 4 or 5 times that number. Now, in addition to these enclosure sites, and enclosures are embankments of soil that can be anywhere from a couple feet tall to 15 feet tall. And they usually have a ditch with them that could be the same amount in depth, so a couple feet deep to maybe 10 feet deep. And we'll see some examples of those in a minute. But in addition to these earthen enclosures, there are also other kinds of earthen monuments. For example, the things you probably know the most about is mounds. And in about 1902, an archaeologist published a book on kind of the history of archaeology in Ohio, and he mentioned that there were 10,000 plus mounds in the state. And I suspect that's really low number too. I think there are way more.
Look at all this stuff.
The other little tidbit of information to add to those numbers is that all of this earth moving happened in a 700-year period from about 300 BC to AD 400. So we're talking about 2,000 years ago. This is a time in Ohio's past when people did not have corn agriculture. They were growing plants, though, to store and get them through the winter, but more at sort of a horticulture level, so large gardens or small gardens. They were also still doing lots of hunting and gathering and spending time at different places around the landscape in their communities where they would harvest nuts and other kinds of seasonally available foods that they'd bring back home. So a lot of us think that these folks were sedentary, that is, they lived more or less in the same spot all year. They came back to it real frequently, if not lived there all the time. But they were in very small settlements, maybe just a couple of houses, like extended families, parents and some of their children in a house, right next door. And then these very small settlements were scattered across the landscape. And in amongst these communities of scattered households are these enclosure sites. So think of them as community centers, burial grounds, places where people got together periodically during the year to meet and participate in activities that could range anywhere from burying the dead to witnessing events like, for example, we're going to talk about the Newark Earthworks site here in a minute briefly, but every 18.6 years, there's quite an interesting event that happens, and everybody can watch it. But if you're at part of the Newark Earthworks, you can see this event, the northernmost rising of the moon on the eastern horizon, rise right up a major alignment of the earthworks. The earthworks were built essentially to observe this moonrise. So the people who built these things were not only amazing engineers with moving dirt, and this is before the wheel was around, before there were animals that could cart things around like horses. This was all done by hand. one basket full of soil at a time, with a lot of effort and a lot of ingenuity to build these very, very large earthworks. So let's take a closer look at some of these and see what it is that I do in this remote sensing of the past. So we have, one of the things for me is, where do I go to do this survey work, this remote sensing that I do? It's not so remote that I can do all of it from my easy chair. I actually have to go to these places and move some instruments around to take readings. And so I often start, with books like this one here. If you've not seen this, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, and you suddenly get excited about Ohio's earthwork sites, this is a great book to have. It's easy to get, I think. It was published in 1848. And it has some really gorgeous drawings of earthwork sites, that most of which are based on measurements taken on the ground in the early to mid 1800s. And 88 of Ohio's earthwork sites are featured in there. A lot of the really, really well-known ones are in this book. So 88, there must be at least 500 more, if not more than that, that aren't in this book. So we also look to other sources for information about where to go survey. These earthwork sites are so large that we can't just randomly survey on the landscape and expect to find them. That Ohio is just too big. So we need a way to zero in on the places where we want to run our instruments to collect data. So we often look at aerial photographs, and this is an example of one of the early ones taken specifically to image earthwork sites. This is the Newark Octagon. Down here in the bottom, I think you can see that octagonal shape. And it has this large circular enclosure here. This circle is about 1,000 feet across, maybe just a bit smaller than that, but still we're talking many hundreds of feet across. A very large thing, and the octagon makes it look small. There's almost an entire golf course. Well, there is an entire golf course covering these two enclosures. So that's how big it is. As big as an 18-hole golf course. Here's a smaller one in Ross County that's, today is basically in somebody's backyard and back pasture or back cornfield. But was visible in the 1930s and still visible, actually, if you know where to look. Here's another one there. This is one of those at the park I used to work at, Hopewell Culture National Historical Park. It's soon to be inscribed, we hope, on the World Heritage List. Maybe you can see this circular shape there. This one is 1,000 feet across there. So very, very big things. Some of these embankments here were originally up to 12 feet tall. That's a lot of soil. Now, not all earthworks are huge, and not all of them are even known or recorded. And a colleague of mine, and we'll see some of his handiwork here a little bit further on, has been scouring old aerial photographs, the kinds of photos that were taken by the United States Department of Agriculture to keep track of Ohioans' agricultural production. But they inadvertently also captured ancient earthwork sites. So here's a nice one in the 1930s. You can see the darker bit here is a ditch that's been dug into the ground. So it's holding water, and that tends to be, moist, wet areas tend to be darker in these old photos. And the lighter thing around it is an embankment. And it was probably built with lighter colored clayey subsoil. And that's perhaps exposed at the surface here. And so it shows up lighter from above. Very easy to see that. But one wonders, this is 1930. Where is that now, almost 100 years later? And today, it's in someone's backyard. So it would be right there along this road in a person's backyard. So these are the kinds of things that when we find them, we often go a knocking on people's doors. Hey, would you mind if we ran our magnetometer in your backyard to see if that thing is still down there? Because we're really interested in learning about what's happened to these places and what else might be preserved there under the surface. Part of the reason I do this stuff, talking to people about earthworks and going out and surveying them with the instruments I'm going to show you examples of here in a second, is so many times in my career I've heard this word destroyed. Oh, the mounds and earthworks, they're all destroyed. You can't see them at the surface anymore. Well, I mean, I'm an archaeologist, and we spend most of our time digging below the surface because there's so much to all of this ancient architecture that's still there underground. The foundations of these embankments and ditches, and I mean, after all, a ditch is a thing dug underground. So the only thing that's really happened to the ditches is they've been filled in. They're still there. And then there's all the foundations of the wooden architecture that was associated with these, and big pits used for cooking food for feasts, and the remains of great big bonfires that were parts of the ceremonies and activities that took place at these sites. So these are all things that we can find today that might even be still there in a backyard like this. Another tool that we rely on for helping find earthwork sites, and especially to kind of see what shape they're in today, is called Lidar, which stands for light detection and ranging. And no doubt you've heard about Lidar because it's been in the news a lot lately. In particular, it's been used a lot in like Central America, down in the Amazon, places where there's lots of jungle and forest cover that makes it really hard to do archaeology and get out there and map really big sites. And so Lidar is nice because it's flown from a plane or a helicopter. It's basically just a laser pointed at the ground, a real nice laser. And that thing fires 100,000 times or more a second. So it's this very, very fast laser pulses shooting at the ground. They often scan back and forth, like you can see in this graphic here below this plane. And they shoot straight down, but they also shoot at angles. So they're not strong enough to pierce a tree or even a leaf, but there's so many light pulses that they go around the leaves and the tree branches, and they go around the power lines and underneath the eaves of the roofs and all that kind of stuff. So they basically get in all the nooks and crannies around standing stuff. And it's enough that we can create maps of what's going on at the ground surface. So these laser pulses reflect off of everything that's below them: trees, houses, your head if you're walking around out there when this thing flew over, all that stuff. And we get all of these reflections or returns back. And then some work is done to classify the reflections into different categories, like tree or building or the last return, or sort of the bare earth, if you will. And so you can decide what reflections in this big mass of data you want to use to make imagery. Like this one here, this is all the reflections, and you can see trees, and it's pretty easy to make those out. You can see the roofs of houses here, and that's, we know what this looks like. It makes sense. So for earthworks, I like to use it. It's especially useful in areas where forever there have been trees there, and you just cannot see them in aerial photographs. So this is not a very well-known site, but it's a really, really well-preserved site that basically nobody knows about. It's near Springfield, Ohio, and it's always covered in trees. So we're looking at a Google Earth image here from 2013. And we can dial back the imagery to earlier periods of time at Google Earth pretty easily. So here's 2004, still in trees. Here's 1994, still in trees. And in fact, you can go all the way back to the earliest aerial photographs, and it's still in trees. And the reason is because it was never plowed. It's always been pasture. And that's good news for the earthworks. So here's the LiDAR data displayed as a shaded relief map. And I've left all the trees in the data, and you can't see the earthworks at all, really. But if we get rid of the trees, now the earthworks stand out really, really well. And hopefully you can see a ditch here with an embankment around it. Here's another one here, same deal, a ditch, embankment. And this one even has a little embankment on the inside edge of the ditch, which is pretty rare. You can see the entryways there, what we call gateways. This one's been a little bit damaged, and we went to visit this one, and the landowner said, oh yeah, that's not from plowing. That's some previous landowner or family member was getting sick of the water that kept accumulating every year in the ditch. So they decided to fill it in, and they bulldozed that. Fortunately, someone stopped them before it got too out of hand, but look at the damage that just a few hours of bulldozing that really didn't need to happen did to this earthwork. The ditches are still there. They're filled in, but that embankment, you can't put that back. I mean, you could reconstruct it, but it would be a reconstruction. Whereas these other things here, you know, these were built by people about 1800 years ago. So, and they're still standing. So this is also part of my mission and the mission of this organization that I'm the president of, the Heartland Earthworks Conservancy. You know, we like to talk to landowners and tell them about the resources they have on their property, encourage them to help protect them for future generations. So here's another cool thing about the LiDAR is you can look at whole landscapes if you want. This is a landscape near Circleville, Ohio. And if you look at the scale down here, 5 miles there. So we're looking at 25 miles of the land around the Scioto River at Circleville. And you can see down here in the lower right, very hilly, dissected, where the glaciers weren't. And then up here, looks pretty rounded off. So the glaciers rode up into this area and ground down Ohio a little bit. And there's an archaeology site right here under that dot that I want to show you. So we're going to zoom in on it. Here we are a little bit closer. We can now see the little streams and such that drain this area. We can see places where people have created, you know, little ponds and stuff for their cattle or whatever. And our site's right there in the middle. Maybe you can see those two little bumps emerging. I'll zoom in again. There it is. This site is known for having 3 mounds, 1, 2, 3. What we're seeing in the background is the Ohio LiDAR data as of about 2006. There's one topographic reading every 4 to 6 feet. So, you know, at the level of the state, that's a whole lot of data. But at the level of this somewhat small site, it's only enough really to see that there are bumps there. Here's another one down here, but it looks kind of grainy. There's not much definition there. So another thing that we've been doing in terms of remote sensing is flying drones to take photographs of these places. And you just fly over with the drone with the camera pointed straight down, take lots and lots of overlapping photographs, many hundreds of them. And then you put those into the computer and use some software to do this process called photogrammetry. So the computer will analyze all the photos, look for common points, you know, that all the photos saw. And then it will use those common points to calculate distance to the ground from the drone and figure out sort of the 3D layout of what's below the drone. So here is our site. And this is called the Snake Den site. It's in Pickaway County. And those mounds we were just looking at in the LiDAR data are right in there. And you can see they're under trees. So how does this work? I mean, if we're supposed to be taking pictures of the ground, you can't even see the ground here. Well, I waited until winter to take the photos, and we spent a lot of time clearing out all the underbrush underneath here, getting rid of it, especially all the honeysuckle that was growing under there, so that we could see down to the ground once the leaves came off, or at least, you know, to ground level. There were still leaves on the ground, of course. Can't do much about that. But we flew, took our photos, made our 3D model, and this is what we came up with. Now, the changes you're seeing there in this picture are just a light source that's kind of rotating around the middle of this photo. So there are our 3 mounds. They show up very nicely. You can see they have little divots in the tops of them. Those are probably old looter pits from someone digging into the mound. We think circa 1930 or so. You can also see this shape of this thing here that shows up better or worse depending on the angle of the light that's kind of surrounding them. This is an outer enclosure that no one knew about at this site. We first discovered it in a magnetic survey, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And then downloaded Ohio's LiDAR data and said, hey, wait, that extends out into this area, down onto the slope of this hill. And in fact, it looks like it goes all the way around this enclosure. So what was once known as just 3 little mounds with a little enclosure here and then a 4th mound out here at a distance, suddenly grew very quickly into something that had an outer enclosure. It became more complex because we started looking at the site in different ways with different kinds of remote sensing. So not everything is visible topographically. So it doesn't matter how many times we fly the drone over and take photos or how many laser beams are shot at the ground. You just can't see anything above ground. There's no topographic relief. So that's where these kinds of instruments come in. And this is what I do for a living, is run these machines to look for things of interest below the surface. And you're probably very familiar with ground penetrating radar. You see it on TV. I mean, you probably don't see this thing on TV too much. An electromagnetic induction meter. And part of what it's detecting is conductivity of the soil or whatever's below the machine. This is the kind of map that a radar can make. So this thing at the top here is a profile of the ground. It's called a radargram. And so imagine the radar running along up here at the top of this, and it's shooting radio waves down into the ground. And as you move it along, those things bounce off of stuff that's below. So we've detected some stacked things here that I've labeled as cistern walls. And all of this weird jumbled stuff here, I'm saying is fill or soil in an old cellar. It's been filled in and it's part of a house. And, you know, this is not very intuitive looking at data in this way. So what we do is collect lots and lots of these profile views, about a foot apart, in straight lines, sort of like you're mowing a yard. And you put that in the computer and merge all that data together into a 3-dimensional block and then slice it, kind of like a CAT scan. And then you can look at it from above and slice away the ground surface on your computer and get this view. So this is where that profile was right here. There's that cistern. So now this is a bird's eye view, and we're looking down at the ground, and we've cut away, it looks like we've cut away about 3 feet of the ground surface to see what the radar can see below ground, which is pretty cool. And so we can see this rectangular outline of this house foundation that dates from the century. We could even see the little stairwell that's coming up out of the back of the house. This has been excavated and that's been confirmed. That's definitely a stairway. This is a big cistern, so there would have been a pipe coming off the roof, you know, emptying into this cistern to fill it with water. So this stuff is not visible at the surface. In fact, across a good part of this cellar, there is a garage, more recent garage, like early to mid concrete floor on top of this thing. And yet we were able to image through the concrete floor with radar. So this is kind of why this was my dream as a kid, at least, being able to put on like X-ray goggles basically and walk around in the landscape, and look underground and see what's down there. Pretty cool stuff. We do a lot of that kind of thing in cemeteries, looking for unmarked graves. And you know, when the graves are detectable, this is how they can look. They're really, really obvious sometimes on a good day. They can also be incredibly subtle and difficult to detect, but just based on the size of the graves, you can tell children from adults. We also have up here near the top, you'll see some that are really faint up here, right in here. These are old graves, so they're not in vaults. These ones down here are so obvious because they're in vaults. So very easy to detect a vault underground with the radar. And if you've been watching off here to the right, you can see the depth as we go deeper and deeper into the ground there in inches. So radar is fun. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that great on earthwork sites, which is what we're here to look for and talk about. So I have this machine that works lovely in a lot of different corners of Ohio. This is a type of magnetometer. So you can imagine by the word magnetometer, this thing's measuring magnetism. There are actually 5 magnetometers on this cart that all are measuring simultaneously as I push it along. This thing at the top here is a really sensitive GPS system that can measure its position within less than an inch So as I push this cart along, the GPS is sending location to this computer here that's right in front of me. And the computer combines the GPS data with the magnetic readings. So we know where the magnetic readings are coming from. And each one of these tubes here actually has two magnetometers in it. One that's up here farther away from the ground that's measuring the Earth's magnetic field, kind of the background reading. And then the other one is way down here, right close to the ground. And it's also measuring the Earth's background magnetic reading, but it's getting the influence of stuff below ground on that. So things in the ground will affect the Earth's magnetic field. For example, iron things are magnetic. Magnets, magnetic. And they're pretty easy to detect. Some rocks, especially ones in particular dropped off by the glaciers that came from Canada, are quite magnetic, so we can detect those too. But there are certain types of soils that have different magnetic properties. In particular, topsoil is more magnetic than the clayey subsoil below it. So if you were to dig a hole under the magnetometer there, a hole that went down, good 3 or 4 feet down into that clay subsoil, and then you filled the hole with topsoil, that hole would be more magnetic because that more magnetic sediment, the topsoil, is next to less magnetic stuff, the clay subsoil. If you light a fire in the bottom of that hole, it will be even more magnetic because the burning will permanently magnetize the soil that's down there in the hole. And you might think that sounds like a strange thing to do, light a fire in the bottom of a pit dug in the ground, but that's how people cooked a lot of their food for nearly 10,000 years in Ohio. So there are these earth ovens, as we call them, these cooking pits everywhere, probably millions upon millions of them from everyday life. And this thing is amazingly good at detecting those. So we can find those really good. You remember when I was describing Ohio's earthworks and how a lot of them are ditches dug into the ground? Well, there's a hole that's dug into the ground, and those ditches have become filled in with topsoil over the years. And we can find those ditches pretty easily. Well, one of the challenges with Ohio earthworks is they're huge. So it can take a long time to survey them. And I'm constantly trying to find ways to do that more quickly because we do a lot of this stuff on the weekends. And we do this stuff at work too. And so nowadays you can use a machine like this one here. This is that 5 magnetometer cart attached to a UTV. And now I can just ride around in style while the magnetometers automatically log readings as we drive across the landscape. We can do vast areas. What seems to me, since I started over 20 years ago, we could do 1 acre a day. And that seemed like an amazing feat then. And now we can do up to 50 acres a day with this machine. And it's only half as wide as it could be. So we could do even more per day if we upgrade it a little bit. So that's kind of the big innovation in Ohio and in archaeological circles these days is how quickly we can now survey landscapes. And why, you may be asking, would we want to do that? This is why. So Ohio's earthworks look a lot like this. They look like nothing from the air. This is an old agricultural field. The earthworks have been plowed flat. The embankment walls are flattened. The ditches have been filled in. The mounds have been flattened. And so this one is one that people often talked about as being destroyed. And I would argue that that's not true. Here's an old map from the 1800s made of the place. So you can see there's lots of interesting shapes in there. These dark shapes here, these are the ditches. The kind of lighter things around them are the embankments. So you can see each one of these enclosures, even these weird kind of C-shaped ones, are ditches and embankments. And then these lumpy sort of things here are mounds. So some of the enclosures have mounds in the middles of them. Others have mounds off the edges of them. This other stuff, this is an orchard that was there in the mid-1800s. It was kind of on top of these. So today, you saw what it looks like today, just an open field. And this is what the magnetometer saw. So we first mapped this one in 2005 and then came back with a machine that could run more quickly and therefore could collect more data and do it at a higher higher resolution. And I think you can see here, we've detected that shape that we saw in that 19th century map. I'm just going to zoom in on this a little bit closer and show you the map and what we've detected real quick. We've got a ditch. We've got the footprint of an embankment around it. You kind of see that real faintly because it's mostly been plowed away. You can see this shape here is kind of interesting. It's looks like it's 4 interlocking circles, or what some might call a quatrefoil. When we compare what the magnetometer detected to what the folks in the 1800s mapped, you can see they mapped it as a little square with rounded corners. They couldn't see this really elaborate, unique shape because it was, 1800 years old. It's pretty melted away sort of and eroded. So a lot of Ohio's kind of interesting shapes like this got recorded as maybe a little square, but often as a circle because there's so many circles. When in doubt, draw a circle and you'll be probably right. But what we're finding as we do more of these surveys is that's not true. We also detect, I mentioned the magnetometer can detect iron. So here's an old fence line. Fence is long gone. You can't see this on the surface, but some of that fence wire is still down there. So we picked that up. And the machine detects lightning strikes. So not the lightning itself, but what it leaves behind. There's so much electricity flowing in the ground when lightning reaches the ground or reaches up from the ground that it permanently magnetizes the ground. It's not the heat that's causing this permanent magnetism like an earth oven. It's the electrical current, because when electricity flows, it creates a magnetic field. And it's so strong that it permanently magnetizes the ground. So here's another example. So that one we were looking at is called Junction Group. It's right here on this old map. This is near Chillicothe. Just a mile away is another place called the Steel Group, and it was originally mapped as 2 circles and a little mound there. That's what that little splotch is. We ran the magnetometer over and, hey, we found those 2 circles. Here they are. There's a circle, and then a thing that's not actually a circle. It's a shape that we often refer to as a squircle, like a square with rounded corners. So it's even more interesting than a circle or a square. It's a combination of both. Must have been very difficult to make, but they made them in spades here. And I don't know how you're viewing this, but if you zoom in a little bit, you can see there are lots of these little squares with rounded corners, kind of all over the place. And then this really strange shape here, not recorded on the original map. It looks to be a square with a corner that's open, kind of a kite shape. And you can see around the ditches, the footprint of the embankments. Here's one that nearly got away. It's almost completely plowed away. Just a bit of the ditch left there that we detected. There's a lightning strike. This crazy thing here is a lightning strike following an old pipe. And then this weird thing here is an old stream channel. It's a depression out there today. And this lump here is what would have been an island in the stream channel. You can see right there, there's a little squircle built on that island in between these 2 larger enclosures. So we've taken this thing, the magnetometer, a handheld version of it, to Serpent Mound. And if you've ever been there, pretty amazing place. It's an embankment, pretty easy to see from the surface, but there's not much space up there to run a magnetic survey. It's mostly taken up by the serpent itself. So I resisted for years going out there to survey, and then finally a colleague of mine put together a team to go do some research there. And he asked me if I might be interested in joining the team to do some magnetic survey. I'm like, okay. I mean, everybody else is going to be doing things out there. We might as well take this opportunity to run the magnetometer. And boy, was it worth it. Here's the magnetic data. So not only did I get a snake in magnetic data, which is cool just by itself, but we discovered this thing here that seems to be coming off the edge of the neck of the snake. And if you took some time and measured its size and shape and then compared it to these other undulations, you would find that it is exactly the same size and shape as these. It's a bit of the serpent that's gone missing over the last 100, 200, 1,000 years, however long this thing has been there. It was either erased or it got eroded away, and its footprint is still down there underground, but it's not visible at the surface. So that would have been right here. So even Serpent Mound has changed over time. and likely it was changed by the people who built it. The folks in the 1800s who made these nice early maps of this thing, they didn't see it, otherwise they would have added it to the map. So it wasn't there as of the 1840s when this place was first mapped. So you just never know what you might find at these earthwork sites. So I want to talk to you for the rest of the evening about circles, in particular big circles. Of late, we've had the opportunity to do two cool projects that involve big circles. And if you thumb through the old books that have maps of these places, you'll see big circles and used in a variety of ways. Often they're attached, to something else. So here's a big square. I don't know if you can read that, but it says a diameter 1,050 feet. So that's one of those 1,000-foot diameter circles. This one's the same, 1,050 feet. And the squares attached to them are like 20 acres in size. So very big places. And Ohio has, used to have 3 standalone great circles. So these are really big circles that are kind of by themselves without other things attached to them. 2 of them are in the Newark area. So one's in Newark, one's in Granville. A third, the biggest, greatest circle of all, is down here at Chillicothe. It's 1,300 feet in diameter, so really big. The one I'm pointing to there is the Newark Great Circle. And you can see it right there on this old map. And you might say, hey, what? I thought you said it was by itself. What's all this other stuff? And I suspect just about all this other stuff came later. This might have been one of the first things out there. So this great circle, the Newark Great Circle, is 1,200 feet in diameter, so really big. And it has a little mound in the middle of it that has lobes to it. It kind of looks like a bird, although its shape is related to the foundation of a building that used to be there. So the mound covers the foundation of some kind of wooden architecture. Here it is in Lidar data, and we've stripped away all the trees and houses and such of Newark, but you can't really get rid of the roads so easily because they're dug down into the ground, basically. But we can very readily see the Great Circle there, and there's the octagon and observatory circle off in the distance. And remember that moonrise event I was telling you about? It follows this axis right here. So if you stand out here at the edge of the observatory circle and look down the neck there and off out the gateway out here, every 18.6 years, you'll see the moon rise at its point on the eastern horizon. So pretty amazing place. One of Ohio's great circles. And here is me for scale, standing in the ditch at the Great Circle. And I'm not the tallest guy, but this place is really huge. So you could put tall people in there and it would still look big. Another great thing is you can go visit this place. It's open to the public, basically 24/7. So you can go see what Ohio's earthworks used to look like. This is one of the best preserved in the state and well worth a trip. And soon, hopefully, to be inscribed on the World Heritage List. Okay, so enough about things we know about. How about stuff we don't know about yet? And I have 2 gems to talk to you about. One is called the Deer Creek Circle, and it's located along the Scioto River, so South Central Ohio, just south of where I live in Columbus, kind of far from Oberlin, but still in the state. And then the other one I want to talk about is called the Birch site. It's on the Whitewater River, which technically is not in Ohio, but the river flows into Ohio and joins the Great Miami River before the Great Miami runs into the Ohio River. So in essence, this is not unlike all the other major river valleys in Ohio. Lots of earthworks along the White River as well. And this one has been a stunner of recent. So let's start with the Deer Creek Circle. Here's what Deer Creek, the landscape there, looks like from the drone. One morning when we were out there to do some magnetic survey, I often take the drone and fly it around and take neat pictures. And usually we're doing this in the winter, so there's often dramatic fog or whatever, out there in the landscape. To give you a sense of scale here, if you can see it, there's a house right there. some pole buildings back here, another slightly larger house there, and some other kind of big houses off in the distance. So the circle is so big it goes off the screen here. This thing was one of those great circles, about 1,000 feet of diameter. So it's a ditch and embankment enclosure, we think. It was not known until just before we did our survey. And it's about 1,800 years old. You probably can't see this, but my van's parked right there. Makes for a good scale. It's not a very big van, and it makes everything look much bigger. We always have to, one of the most challenging things about what we do isn't pushing the magnetometer around for endless hours. It's getting permission from landowners to do these surveys. Most of these places are on private land. And so we have to do a lot of chatting and talking and reassuring and sharing of results. And, you know, most people are really excited about the things they have on their property. Others are not as excited, but are happy to let us do the survey. Some people say no. And sometimes persistence pays off. If you just wait for 5 years, people move out, other people move in. So we're playing the long game and trying to survey these earthwork sites. This one is located right here in the state, along this stream called Deer Creek. And you see all these little stars here. These are new earthworks that have been discovered in aerial photographs, including the old ones that this fellow here, David Lamp, has been looking at. A colleague of mine, a friend who's now retired, Harry Campbell, he was just looking on Google Earth, searching on his lunch hour when he was at work. He found a number of them, and I even got in on it and was looking around on Google Earth and found one day. So really anyone can go on Google Earth and find these things if you want to. If you do that, I would encourage you to look in the main river valleys, you know, where the earthworks show up on these maps. That's where you're most likely to see them. And you're going to see them in areas that are agriculturally active, generally speaking. So here's Ross County, where Deer Creek Circle is located. It's at the north end of the county. And there's so many sites in here that it's hard to show all the names of the earthworks and not have them run into each other. Something like 37 enclosures, and some of them really big, in this county alone along the Souder River. And for the longest time, we didn't really know of any along Deer Creek, which seemed odd because it's a really good sized stream, nice valley there. And it's right at the edge of all these other famous places. And it turns out that we just hadn't looked enough. So there's one here right at the confluence of Deer Creek with the Souder River we call it the Weingartner Works. It was a previously unknown one. We did magnetic survey there and found that one. That's a medium-sized circle, but the one that I was most surprised to find evidence of is this Deer Creek Circle. And here's the photograph that my friend and colleague David Lamp sent me one evening. He had found it in an old aerial photograph. He was searching through all the photos of the whole county from the 1960s, and he spotted this image here. Can you see the circle there? Once you start seeing circles, they kind of show up everywhere you look, but that's what caught his eye, especially that edge there. Pretty clear, and it's nearly perfectly circular, which is something that's common to a lot of these ancient earthworks. So once he had shown me where it was, I went and compiled all the photographs I could find to see how this thing changes through time and shows up in different years, and see if there might be other stuff there. And one thing I noticed is, you know, it's fairly easy to see in the older images and gets progressively harder after, you know, the 90s. It kind of disappears from photographs. Probably changing agricultural practices have something to do with that more than anything. And maybe the time of year that photos later in time were taken also affected its visibility. So the year of the photograph and what's growing and all that really affect how well you can see these sometimes. But this one seems to be the real deal. It shows up in at least 4 or 5 different photographs taken in different years and at different times of the year. That's a good sign. We can look at the Lidar data too and see if it's visible there. And this is where it should be. And I have to show you with a red circle where it is because it doesn't show up in the LiDAR. It's really flat out there. So it's nearly invisible topographically, but you can see it's sitting up on this kind of high terrace right at the edge of the bluff overlooking the Deer Creek Valley. It's a pretty good drop there. I forget what it is, 50 or 60 feet down to the floodplain there. So it's in a nice spot. Here's a close-up of nothing because you can't see it actually topographically. But a few things of note about this place is that this is some kind of outwash terrace or something scoured away a long time ago. We know that it's kind of loamy soil, so it's a mix of sand, silt, and clay. And that's sitting on some outwash deposits from the glaciers. And those are composed of sand and gravel. So sand and gravel, not so magnetic, but soil, more magnetic. And what's challenging about this place is there's quite a bit of sand in the soil. And maybe that's why it's so flat and hard to see today, is that sand just didn't hold its shape very well and was easily eroded and quickly plowed down flat. And the other thing about sand is it's magnetically subtle, so that can make it a challenge to detect. So didn't have a lot going for us when we set out to try to find this thing. We pushed this cart around for 5 weekends. A guy named Al Tanetti and Al is on our board for the Heartland Earthworks Conservancy as our vice president and secretary. And he's also somebody who has earthwork fever like me and likes to go out and try to map these places in our free time. So we collected magnetic reading every 10 centimeters, so about every 3 inches as we're pushing this cart along. The machine is recording a reading. Each one of these is, in fact, is recording a reading. And our spacing between them is about 1.5 feet or so, 50 centimeters. And here's day 1. So we, because we have 5 magnetometers, we can do a pretty big area. And it had been in beans and they were harvested, so it's nice and flat and relatively easy to collect the data. And hopefully you can see the earthwork there. The yellow line is what we saw in the aerial photograph. And then in the magnetic data there, magnetic data will be shown in black and in this a very large circle there.
Jarrod,
You can also, oh yeah.
Could you go back a bit? We lost you for a second there.
Oh,
just like the last 15 seconds or so.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Probably my really bad connection. I was just talking about how the earthwork here is clearly visible in the data there. And the yellow line represents where the earthwork should be based on the aerial photographs. And then maybe you can see this stuff at the back, kind of behind the earthwork relative to the road anyhow. There's some little splotches in there. And we got kind of excited by them because they seem to be paralleling the curvature of the earthwork. And I was wondering if they were going to go all the way around. I had big plans, and I started to think, man, I'm going to have to really survey a huge area if they go all the way around. So the next day we tried to follow those out and see where they went. And they did keep going, but eventually they stopped. So they are kind of following the arc of the earthwork. It's also the arc of the hill behind it. And they seem to occur in a big blob there on one end. There's a whole bunch of them clustered together. We'll come back to those in a second. So from there, we kept trying to follow the circle around. Took the survey on day 3 over to the road. You can kind of see the old fence that used to be in there, a wire fence. And by day 5, here we are, completely done with the survey. And this is like 5 Sundays, essentially, in December. I think we must have started this right after or around Thanksgiving in 2020. That's COVID year, I believe. And one of the great things about geophysical survey is there's nobody out there. So you don't have to worry too much about getting COVID while doing a magnetic survey. We covered over 50 acres, so big chunk of land, and we found some pretty neat stuff. Let's have a look. We've got the earthwork going all the way around. We've got, here's a close-up of it, and what I think we detected was a ditch on the inside, embankment on the outside. And that's quite a bit like the other great circle that's in this area, the Shriver Circle. Here it is, near Mound City. It goes inside this prison over here. And we've detected the ditch. That's that dark background. A lot of stuff kind of on top of it, iron pipes and other sorts of things. But in particular, what I wanted to show you was that there was a mound known in the middle of it, and it appears that we detected a bit of that. And it has these gateways every so often cutting through the embankment. So here's the old map from the 1840s, and you can see these gaps are how people might have entered the earthwork, but they're also how people might have observed things out there on the distant horizon from within the earthwork. So they're observation points as well. And this one, we detected those two. We detected a new one over here that's not on the map. It should be, right about there, but it's not on the map. And we kind of figured that maybe there's another one, perhaps right here, because that would make for quite a symmetrical thing here if we add this other one up here. So we're not sure if that's there because there's an electrical substation there, so we couldn't get in there to collect any data. And it has a mound in the middle. So there's what the stuff in the under the mound looks like. It takes a little bit of imagination to see something there. And of course, there's Murphy's law of magnetic survey in action. It's a pipe going over it. So this is the kind of thing we should expect here at Deer Creek Circle, if it is in fact one of these great circles. It should have a thing in the middle of it, and it should have some gateways. So we think we detected some gateways, but they're pretty hard to see in these data. But what about in the middle? Let's have a look here. We're going to zoom in on that square. And the first thing that catches your eye, I suspect, is that really weird thing on the left. It looks like a starfish. That's a lightning strike. And I suspect it may have hit a tree and followed out the roots or followed in the roots. So we've got that kind of thing in the data, but that's not what I'm mostly interested in. Do you see the other thing that's really intriguing there? How about this thing over here? This is dead center in the middle of the circle. We've got another circle here. It's 36 meters in diameter, which is over 100 feet. So it itself is pretty good sized, but it's dwarfed by the overall size of the Great Circle, and it's right in the middle. Probably was a mound here at one point, and what we may be seeing is some kind of fence or little ditch or trench that's around the footprint of a building that would have been here in the middle. And in that building, people may have participated in ceremonies involving the dead, mortuary activities, other kinds of special events and such. It's quite an important spot at this place, right in the middle of the enclosure. As to our pits, we ventured into the neighboring field just to see if they kept going, and they do. So we don't actually know how far they go over there yet, but we've got quite a few of them here, dozens of them, and they're actually really big. So I measured them, some of them, and they range from about 7 feet across to as much as like 12 or 13 feet across. So those are big holes in the ground. I suspect that they were made about the time the earthworks were made. They don't have the look of being something from the historic era. They may be pits dug to gather raw materials for building things in the earthworks, such as gathering sand. They could be huge party pits where food was cooked to feed all the people working to build the earthwork. These are some of the interesting questions that we can ask now that we know that these other large features are turning up at these sites that you wouldn't normally see, except in a survey like this. And then finally, there was a wee little cluster down here in the bottom, outside the earthwork. Here it is over here on the right. I know that it doesn't look like much, but there seems to be possible remains of a building here. And there's a precedent for thinking that's something. We've detected much better preserved versions of this at other sites. And here's an interpretation of that. So it's a circular enclosure, probably of posts that were once standing in the ground here, with these little pits or other posts, or we're not sure what these are yet. They haven't been excavated, so inside of it. And we see this a lot at lots of other earthwork sites, various shapes, and sizes of these circular. So they're building remains or other kinds of small bits of architecture like that. And I suspect that there are lots of these at the earthwork sites we don't know about, and only some of them are being detected by the magnetometer. Okay, so that's Deer Creek. Now, it's 8:04, and I should probably ask everyone if they're okay to go on. I mean, the Birch site is wicked cool. You can leave now if you want, but you're gonna miss out, let me tell you. So
You're getting some
Liz,
thumbs up. How long are you talking, I might ask?
not that much longer.
No, just give people a heads up. I'm sure people are delighted to continue.
Yeah, I mean, they can go if they want. That's the great thing about being at home on the couch is you just turn off your computer or whatever you're looking at. Let's talk about Birch because it is so amazingly cool. So it started off as this shape here, just two circular enclosures, and they're visible today as little undulations in the landscape. So the map would go like that. Again, this is a drone's eye view. We've got a nice farm field out there. And over the years, this thing has been photographed about a gazillion times. And the first photo taken of the place that I'm aware of in 1936 really shows a lot of stuff in here. We can see the two big enclosures that are still visible today. And hopefully your keen earthwork eye is already picking out tons of other little enclosures in there. And you know, you're wondering like, God, how many are there? My guess is there must be more there than even are showing up in the aerial photograph. So in the 1990s, some archaeologists wrote a book chapter about this place, and they used the aerial photographs to make this map. And notice the shapes in there. They're basically all circles, except this strange shape here in that one. This is called a Pandura form. It's kind of shaped like the outline of a violin or a leaf, maybe. I don't know what that thing is. But otherwise, there are a bunch of little circles. Well, there's way more going on here than this. So just for funsies, a colleague of mine and I started looking at newer photographs because a lot of photos actually have been taken since the 1990s. So we have even more opportunities now to see new stuff. We found this one from 2012 that was like jaw-dropping. It's like, whoa, look at that. I mean, those are easy to see in that photograph. And they ain't circles. Well, that one's a circle. But these are definitely not circles. They're that rectangle or square with a rounded corner, the squircles. And there seems to be 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, plus that circle there at the top. And they're in an arcing pattern, which is interesting. They seem to be in an arcing line. We looked at every photo we could find and came up with this drawing here. And immediately, of course, and I know your eyes are seeing this because it's hard to miss, there seems to possibly be a circular arrangement of these things. A big circular arrangement, like Great Circle big. So this is about 1,000 feet across. So this is a, I think as Al described it the other day, this is a circle of squircles. And so when we first saw this, we thought, you know, we need some confirmation of this because it's almost too unbelievable to be true. So we got permission to do a magnetic survey in this area here. We just happened to be driving by on the way back from a project, and we swung by, and this property was for sale. So we called the number on the sign. They gave us permission. We went out there with our equipment, collected some magnetic data in the beans, and we got this result. See that, and there are portions of two there that are perfectly in line with this emerged circular enclosure. I think those cinched it for us. This is definitely an on-purpose arrangement of small enclosures in a great big geometric shape, and that's one of the first times we had ever seen it so convincingly displayed. Oh, there's a close-up for you. Lots and lots of other farm debris in there, lots of iron objects because you're around these buildings here. But the earthworks are still visible through all that. We published that in a book. We were all excited. And we published our little interpretive map, you know, and here it is, everybody. But what was nagging me was this gap here. For years, that was bugging me. Like, why isn't there an earthwork there? Or two, actually. There's space for two. And I started looking for more aerial photographs, and I actually found one that showed at least one and maybe another one of those little enclosures there. In fact, it looked like we had the entire thing all the way around. But not being from Indiana, I didn't know how to get access to do a magnetic survey in this place until one day through social media, I just accidentally ran into someone who was able to talk to folks in that area and maybe get us access, and they did. And so Al and I spent 14 weekends driving back and forth to this place to see if we could survey the whole thing and confirm that in fact it was this amazing. Maybe we only took 10 trips. It felt like 14. 10 trips. No, that was the 4 hours of driving, 2 hours there and 2 hours back. And we did in the middle of winter in some less than fun weather sometimes. We were also helped by Harry Campbell, that fellow that was looking on the area photographs. And we had some other folks help us with land access and all that. And then the family members were great, letting us park on their property and survey their places. So this is what it looks like out there. Big open field. Here are our two enclosures right here. And I decided that we should start right in the middle, because I'm always thinking, well, what if we can't go back? Who knows what might happen? Let's do the most important bit first. So we started right in the middle and went right across the north end of the big circle of squircles. And let's see what we found here. So indeed, the two we found back in 2016 keep on going. And it looks like they're all going to be visible in the magnetic data. And we're only seeing the ditches here. The embankments have been plowed away. And there might be hints of an embankment there, but the embankments aren't visible. But you can very clearly see the gateways, the entrances into these, and you can see some other things. So for example, we can see that this thing, which has been kind of vague in the maps, and we thought might be a little squircle, is in fact a little circle. We could see that all the enclosures we had as of day one had gateways that pointed to the inside of the circle. So that's interesting. It really made me want to know what might be right in the middle. We found that the other enclosures that weren't a part of this circular arrangement kind of pointed in lots of other directions, not towards the middle. And then finally, we have one little enclosure down here from day one that's not detected in the aerial photographs. You just can't see it because it's underneath the old farm lane there. So pretty hard to see that in the aerial photographs. So aerial photos can't show you everything you really need to get out there with a magnetometer. Day two, moving down toward the middle because I really needed to know if there was anything in the middle. There wasn't, unfortunately, at least not that we could detect magnetically. But what we did find is two of the circles in this big circular arrangement face each other. They're right across the way from each other. So maybe that's significant. And we also found two enclosures in the arrangement that have gateways that don't point in. They're the only two. They point in the same direction, which I have no idea what that means, but it's an interesting pattern. There's going to be a lot of that. I have no idea what that means, but it's interesting for this place because it's so unusual. Day three, we moved south. At this point, I'm trying to fill in all the way around the circle of squircles. We covered the big circle. We found that those two missing enclosures are in fact there. With the big circle, this one's been excavated a bit in the middle in the 1960s, and some small pits with human remains in them were found, and the remains of a building was here in the middle. So this is the gateway right there. It's kind of faint, but I think maybe you can see the ditch there, and this is the footprint of the embankment around it. And the gateway. And so we've got what I think is this inner ring here is probably the remains of a circle of standing posts that used to be inside this thing. So imagine big telephone pole size posts sticking up when you walk inside of this. And then inside that inner wooden circle, At the back are these four things here. They're probably big pits. I mean, you can't see how big they are scale wise, but these would be 3 or 4 feet across. They're good sized pits in the ground. They may have burial remains, human remains in them, or they could have been for feasting or some other activity related to the enclosure. Okay, so day 4, we've made it all the way around, and yes, indeed, this is a full circle of squircles. It is about 885 feet in diameter if you measure from the middles, the middle of these enclosures, and that's great circle caliber. So that's good. We're not seeing anything right in the middle, which would be right in here. But just about all of the gateways point inwards toward the middle. So whatever those things are focused on is happening in the middle, except for these two strange ones here that are opposite each other in the circle arrangement. They point in this northeasterly direction. Let's see, we ended up having 4 circles, including one really big one in this arrangement. And then we had this strange situation here, where if you look at the little rectangles with rounded corners, they all have a long axis that kind of follows the arc of the circle until you get to that one, and it's perpendicular. And I suspect what happened here was there wasn't quite enough space, perhaps, to put this one in an alignment like all the others, because this circle was already here when all this was built. I think this is the oldest component of this site, or one of the older ones, and these were added on later. And I don't know if this is bad engineering or unfortunate engineering, but perhaps this is telling us something about time and the fact that maybe this thing was already here when these were added on later. And they had to turn it in order to make it fit well and not crowd that big circle too much. Let's see. So as of day 6, we had found all the enclosures from our aerial photographs, and we had 30 of them and counting. And I say and counting because there are more over here. This fellow wouldn't let us survey on his property, but we know from the aerial photographs there's at least one more in there, right there. So one of the weird things here is, why a big circle and what's going on up here? There seems to be a bigger gap there, and these things seem to be related to it, almost as if this is an avenue, an entryway for coming into the big arrangement of enclosures there. And you get that shape if you're me and you try to draw it, in a really bad way. And that shape is a shape that we've already seen in this presentation way back toward the beginning on this map. It's basically the shapes we see here of the big circles and their entryways. This one is connected to the octagon. This one is the Great Circle. And it has a gateway with embankments and ditches that point outward. So this could be an element of architecture that's being, not only is the Great Circle thing being maybe discovered here for the first time, because I suspect these clusters of small enclosures are a bit earlier in time. But we've also got this kind of entryway element writ large in the arrangement of these small enclosures. So there we are at the very end. This is, I think, my last slide. We covered 85 acres, all on foot, pushing that magnetometer back and forth. One of the nice things about doing this stuff is you can eat more pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving because you're going to burn it off pretty quickly, pushing this thing around. So it's great exercise for me. And as you saw earlier, I'm finding ways to extend my longevity in doing these surveys by towing this thing around. So we do some of this now too, but not usually on the weekends. Usually the weekends are all walking and pushing. So with that, I'll stop. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to keep answering them as long as you want to keep asking them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burks. This has been so fascinating, and people I know have really enjoyed it. Before, I'm going to take us to gallery view soon, as soon as you stop sharing. But while most everyone is here, could you talk a little bit about the Conservancy or any way people can support the preservation?
So our group, the Heartland Earthworks Conservancy, is a small nonprofit. We're really just a board of 5 people. And what we do is we go out and do these kinds of surveys, and we share results, usually same day. So Al and I will go do a mag survey, I'll process the data, and then I'll post it on Facebook. So if you're a Facebook user, you can check out kind of up to the minute results on our Facebook page. Just look for Heartland Earthworks Conservancy. And we have a website that's sort of like most websites, always under construction or another. But another thing that we do is, like, we don't really take donations to keep our organization going, because we're a small organization and we don't have a lot of costs for our day-to-day stuff. But what we do want people to be involved in, if they can, is we help other organizations usually buy sites to protect them, for others, and to open them to the public. So we've done this on a number of occasions now. So just basically keep your eye on the Facebook page, and periodically you'll see a call for donations, for people to go donate to some other organization, that's helping buy one of these sites. And even $50, $20 even, but the more the better, of course, will help. And we've had purchasing campaigns, like for that first site I showed, the Junction Group. We helped raise $350,000 in about 2 weeks. And then that money was used as a match for a much bigger grant that resulted in being able to buy the whole place, essentially. And now it's open to the public, and we've spent a lot of time developing interpretive signs. We even have an app you can download called Junction Earthworks. It's in the App Store for Apple products, and I think you can get it on Google Play for Android. It's free. It's got a lot of interpretive material in there. So that's just something we thought would be fun for people who can't get to the site, who can basically virtually visit it from home on their phone. So we do that sort of stuff too.
We did get one question, and they might be coming into your chat or Stephanie's as well. But Thomas Schock asked, how big is the circle in Circleville, Ohio?
Circleville, Ohio. As you all probably know, the reason the town is named that is because it's built on top of a big circular earthwork, also a square. And that circle is another one of these great circles. It's about 1,000 feet, or was 1,000 feet in diameter. It's a little unusual though, because it had 2 embankments with a ditch between. All that was basically leveled off in the 1800s to make way for the town. They started the town in a circular shape, and then that became unpractical. So they squared the circle, and that resulted in basically the destruction of the circle. I'm sure there are slivers here and there in town that one could find if one tried really hard, but it's pretty filled in there in Circleville these days. But a great circle, yeah, 1,000 feet in diameter.
Anyone else? You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand. Erin, I saw you raising your hand.
Yeah, thank you for giving this lecture. Sort of my question is, whenever you guys find like a new earthwork or mound or anything like that, do you do any type of work with like local Native American groups to sort of let them know that you've discovered something?
Yes and no. I mean, we sort of let the public know, and sometimes local Native American groups are involved in the projects, so they know, right away. So it varies. Sometimes private landowners don't want a lot of people to know, and we kind of have to respect that. So they allow us to map the place and record it, so that if someone decides they want to build a new pipeline through there, they'll have to avoid that, or take measures to protect it in various ways. So we don't always publicize everything we do in that sort of way. So it kind of varies. Were there any more questions? Erin, until someone else talks, you're like in the middle of the screen, really big. So. I see Myron asked, what techniques, if any, were used by the mound builders to preserve the integrity of the mounds? A lot of the earthworks are built with clay, so that's kind of more stable, certainly, than the sandy soil used at the Great Circle, or I mean at the Deer Creek Circle. So the clay kind of holds its shape a lot longer and is more resistant to erosion. But some of the mounds, especially I've noticed at Mound City near Chillicothe and other mound sites in Ross County, the mounds are built with clay, but then also covered by gravel. So they have a rock mantle, a rock covering on them that also helps keep them from eroding and maybe keeps the on them. That's one way that we know of. If that's what your question is asking. So that's like an engineering way. They helped to kind of make them last longer, I guess. And whatever they did, it seemed to have worked because there's so many of these things that are still around 2,000, 2,300 years later even. And if it wasn't for us, they'd probably, a lot more would still be around.
Well, I might have a final wrap-up question. You've been doing this. Oh, and then I see one more question after me. I'll start with, let's see, Thomas. How did they clear the huge virgin trees and level the sites?
You've caught on to something that I didn't even mention. Not only did they start and do it in fascinating ways with amazing engineering, but Ohio used to be covered in trees. So how do you get rid of the trees? We don't know, because there's very little archaeological record that's been examined in any detail. But one way to remove big trees is to girdle so that you cut a channel around the base of them, and they die eventually. And then you can burn them down pretty readily. You don't have to chop them down, but if you're going to do it that way, you're going to have to be in it for the long haul, because that could take years to girdle 20 acres of trees. So we don't know if all of the trees inside the enclosures and a bit outside were cut down, or if just the ones right where the embankment walls were, or we haven't spent a lot of time like digging long lengths of embankment walls. When any excavation happens on the earthworks, it's usually a trench across the embankment wall, so you're really looking at just a little sliver of it. But what I'm getting at is we haven't seen any evidence of big trees that were built around. They were standing and they just heaped up soil around them. There don't seem to have been any trees where the embankments were built. They were removed. We do find evidence of burned logs and stuff in or under the embankments. So maybe that's a sign that they're being burned down, maybe even cut down. But given the amount of wooden architecture that we have found evidence of, they were definitely cutting down trees, and a lot of them, and some pretty darn big ones. Some of the great circles, if not all of them, have circles of the same diameter roughly of huge posts. We're talking 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So imagine just trying to cut down a tree of that size with the tools that were on hand then, and they would have been stone tools by and large. And once you get that thing cut down, then you have to cut it up into chunks. So there's lots more cutting, and then you got to move it. It would have been incredibly heavy, way heavier than a basket full of soil. So it's easy for 100 people to move quite a bit of dirt with a bunch of baskets, in several days. But how do you move like 5 tons of tree? That's a different kind of engineering, but they did it, and they did it on a massive scale. And so you all probably know what Stonehenge is. There they moved big stones and put them upright. In Ohio, they were moving really big trees that were cut down and turned into giant logs, and they turned them upright to make big circles of these large, we call them posts, but that's really a disservice. I don't know what you'd call that, just massive earthen timbers standing upright. So I think a lot of the enclosures may have started their lives as wooden enclosures, And then later on, they became earthen enclosures. And there's some evidence at some of these places that the wooden enclosures went through several iterations, so that they were there for a while. So you might have 3 kind of overlapping circles of big wood posts. And then eventually maybe it became an earthen enclosure, kind of toward the end of its use life. And that's the part we see today, is the earthen enclosure.
Well, thank you. And my question had actually related to just kind of the appreciation for the people who built these based on what you have detected and what you can kind of figure out from the evidence you've been looking at. But I guess in your career, just a wrap-up question, like, has your appreciation for these peoples changed over the course of like what you've discovered?
Well, that's a tricky one, because one of the first earthworks I worked at as an archaeologist in Ohio was Hopewell Mound Group. So, as an archaeologist, that's like going and working at the Great Pyramid the first day. And so everything after that is kind of small. But I've, so there's a lot of big earthworks in parks. So we don't need to necessarily go work at those because they're already protected, although we have surveyed a lot of parks. So we've been focusing a lot on the smaller sites. And as you saw with Birch, that ain't small. It may have a bunch of small enclosures, but there are a lot of them. And so I think what we've really come to appreciate is that what we think we know about these places is, it is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more out there, wooden architecture and enclosures and all that. And it's almost unfathomable how much work went into building these places. And when you start to think about how big of a place they are and how many people could have been there, at any given time to participate in all the activities that must have gone on, what an event that must have been, at any one of these places. And it's hard not to think that the sites with just one enclosure or 2 little enclosures, are they like the local place, that's just, local communities earthwork, and are the big ones the places where lots more people came? And so there are ideas about this in print, and maybe you've read some of these about how the big places are pilgrimage sites. And people came from all over the place, not just the Ohio Valley, but way beyond, to participate in these activities. And we certainly do. People have found lots of stuff at them that has come from very far away, like conch shells from the Gulf Coast and obsidian from out in Yellowstone, and gobs of copper from Lake Superior area, silver from a little closer to us here, Ontario, and mica from the Blue Ridge Mountains. I mean, you go on and on and on. All of these amazing things that aren't from Ohio that got here somehow, and maybe they came with people, or maybe people living in the area went and got it. But either way, it was how they knew about all these places. Because now we cheat. We just get out our smartphones, and type in an address, and away we go. But they didn't have smartphones, so they had to keep all this knowledge in their brains and tell stories about it all, and passing on all that knowledge. It must have been these events, where at these earthworks must have been amazing meeting places, where you'd meet your spouse, and you get it embroiled in all of these games and activities, and then you would have special ceremonies and stuff to honor the dead. And it must have been quite the events.
I think it's great to end it on that. I appreciate you for everything you have brought to everyone here tonight. And thank you to all of the attendees for your questions and for being with us here tonight. So yeah, a round of applause, either with emoticons or just in the picture here. But thank you so much, Dr. Burks, and everyone have a wonderful evening and safe holiday season. Take care.
Okay, bye. Thanks for listening.